Silence settled like a heavy curtain over room 214 of the Fulton County Courthouse as 8-year-old Malachi Turner stood before Judge Hawthorne. In his crisp navy blue blazer borrowed from his late father's closet, Malachi's small frame seemed impossibly poised. He cleared his throat and said, "Your Honor, I respectfully request permission to challenge the admissibility of the fingerprint evidence." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. No one expected the wisdom of a child to outshine trained lawyers. Before we dive into Malachi's extraordinary journey, let me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of justice seekers. The day had begun like any other in the sunlit East Atlanta neighborhood of Glenwood Heights. Samuel Turner, Malachi's grandfather and guardian, was running an errand at Bennett's corner market. The crisp autumn air carried the scent of falling leaves as Samuel, a former civil rights marcher in the 1960s, helped a white customer gather her spilled groceries. He offered kindly, "Let me help you with that, ma'am." Unbeknownst to Samuel, the store owner, Roger Simmons, was on edge. A rash of petty thefts had plagued his business, and he was quick to assume the worst. "That's the man," Simmons shouted, pointing at Samuel, his voice cracking with urgency. Even though security footage clearly showed a younger man fleeing the scene, officers Dalton and Harding leapt into action. They spun Samuel around, snapping raw metal cuffs onto his wrists. "Please, officer, my shoulder surgery," Samuel protested, wincing as the cuffs bit into his skin, but his words fell on deaf ears. Across the street, Malachi emerged from the public library, books clutched to his chest. He froze at the sight. The man who had raised him after his parents' fatal accident being treated like a criminal. Malachi's world pivoted on its axis. Since age 5, his grandfather had filled their 2-bedroom home with books, civil rights histories, legal treatises, even Latin dictionaries. Samuel had always told Malachi, "Knowledge is our shield, my boy." Now that shield felt like a lifeline. The community sprang into action. Neighbors brought casseroles, posted bail contributions, and offered temporary care for Malachi. Yet the bond between Samuel and his court-appointed public defender, Mr. Wallace, was as thin as the worn file on the defense table. Mr. Wallace, already managing 80 active cases, barely glanced at the Turner file before suggesting, "Mr. Turner, they'll give you 5 years instead of 15 if you plead guilty." Samuel's jaw tightened. "I am innocent," he said. The words echoed Samuel's civil rights mantra. Justice is blind, but it must also be courageous. For days, Samuel languished behind steel bars. Each morning, Malachi would slip into the old study, fingers trembling, pulling Franklin's leather-bound law books from the shelf. Constitutional law, criminal procedure, rules of evidence. He pored over precedent after precedent, determined to prove that the system he revered could still work. Malachi's teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had always recognized his brilliance. In 3rd grade, he had corrected the school's history pamphlet on the civil rights movement, an act that both impressed and unsettled his principal, Mr. Winters, who saw no need for gifted programs for black students. Despite official resistance, Miss Rodriguez secretly guided Malachi through advanced readings during lunch. Now, with Samuel's freedom and Malachi's future on the line, those secret lessons became his arsenal. When he approached Mr. Wallace with his findings, the attorney patted his head distractedly. "Nice work, kid. Now let the grown-ups handle it." But Malachi refused to be sidelined. He drafted a detailed timeline showing that Samuel could not have been at the scene at the time the robbery occurred. He noted that Officer Dalton had not read Samuel his Miranda rights. He gathered the original calibration records for the market's security cameras. He cross-referenced fellow witness statements. One afternoon, Mrs. Lillian Patton, the elderly widow who lived next door, quietly introduced Malachi to her cousin's husband, retired Judge Harold Matthews, one of Georgia's first black jurists. Hidden in Mrs. Patton's floral sofa, Malachi laid out his scrawled notes. Judge Matthews listened in stunned silence. "This is remarkable," he finally said, "but how do we get the court to listen?" The preliminary hearing loomed. In courtroom 3B, the polished oak benches groaned beneath the weight of an unusually large crowd. Family members, neighborhood supporters, and a cadre of local reporters. District Attorney Victoria Cunningham entered with icy confidence, her blonde hair pulled tight, her tailored suit unyielding. Mr. Wallace muttered to Samuel, "Remember what I told you. Plead guilty. Take the deal." Samuel shook his head. The bail was already set unreasonably high. 4 weeks had passed since his arrest. His health was deteriorating, and he worried for Malachi's welfare. Judge Hawthorne called the session to order. D.A. Cunningham launched into her opening, brandishing grainy footage and mentioning Samuel's civil rights arrest in 1968 as proof of troublesome behavior. Mr. Wallace barely looked up from his phone. Malachi sat beside his neighbor, Mrs. Patton, heart pounding as he watched his grandfather endure prosecutorial theatrics. Then, during the introduction of an alleged voluntary statement from Samuel, Malachi rose on unsteady legs. "Objection! Hearsay!" he said, his voice clear. All eyes snapped to the child. Judge Hawthorne glared. "Who is this boy?" But Malachi held his ground. "Your Honor, Crawford versus Washington requires that the defendant have a chance to confront any witness. This statement never appears in the arrest report." A hush followed. Even D.A. Cunningham looked unsettled. Mr. Wallace sprang to life, stammering an objection, but Judge Hawthorne sustained Malachi's. A 15-minute recess was called as murmurs buzzed around the room. Outside, local reporter Shanice Williams thrust a microphone at Malachi. "Did you really just out-lawyer trained attorneys?" she asked. Malachi only whispered, "I had to." Behind the scenes, D.A. Cunningham huddled with Detective Mercer, the lead investigator. Orders were barked: find a way to discredit that boy, enhance the footage, reanalyze the prints. Their resolve hardened. They would not be humiliated by an 8-year-old. When the hearing resumed, Judge Hawthorne admitted Malachi's objection, suppressing the supposed confession. The mood had shifted. Spectators whispered, taking notes on the boy genius. The judge set a trial date 6 weeks hence, denied bail reduction, and dismissed court. That night, as Malachi prepared for bed in Mrs. Patton's guest room, he felt the gravity of what lay ahead. The legal codes he'd memorized lay open on the desk, but his greatest resource was the spark of hope in Samuel's eyes. "Grandpa," he whispered through the bars during their weekly visit, "I promise I will bring you home." Samuel gripped his grandson's small hand. "With you leading the way, I believe it." As Malachi drifted to sleep, he pondered a larger truth. Knowledge isn't merely power. It's justice's fiercest champion, whether wielded by judge or child, and he was just getting started. Have you ever seen someone so young challenge authority and win a moment in court? Comment 1 if you believe knowledge knows no age, or 2 if you think justice favors the powerful. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true stories of courage and justice. The gray early morning skies over Atlanta mirrored the somber mood that settled over Glenwood Heights. Malachi Turner awoke before dawn, his small frame already alert with purpose. He closed his eyes and recited the rules of evidence one last time, embedding every nuance into his memory. Today was the first day of the actual trial, and nothing could distract him. Neither the rumble of Mrs. Patton's ancient radiator, nor the steam of his hot cocoa growing cold beside his elbow. Across town, Samuel sat in the holding cell, eyes scanning the same worn leather-bound books that lined the courthouse library shelves. He traced the embossed title of Criminal Procedure with a trembling finger, recalling how Malachi had whispered corrections to Mr. Wallace during the preliminary hearing. A surge of both pride and anxiety pulsed through him. His grandson's intellect had changed the course of this case, but now the stakes were higher than ever. At 8:30 a.m., the jurors filed in, mostly middle-aged white citizens, save for one elderly black woman whose calm gaze betrayed neither bias nor fear. Malachi noted their faces as they passed the spectator benches, the chiseled jaw of a stockbroker in row 3, the nervous tick of a postal worker in row 5, the unreadable expression of a schoolteacher in row 1. Each would weigh the evidence that day, and Malachi's every calculation depended on their perceptions. Judge Hawthorne entered and settled into his high-backed chair, eyes flicking toward the defense table. Malachi sat beside Samuel, shoulders squared beneath his blazer. For days he had reviewed opening statements and practiced his whispered cues. Mr. Wallace had withdrawn, embarrassed, he claimed, leaving Malachi's plan to Catherine Sullivan, the pro bono civil rights attorney who had taken interest in Samuel's case. Today, Catherine would formally represent Samuel. Malachi would serve as her junior consultant, a role recognized reluctantly by the court. Catherine rose with calm confidence. Your Honor, may it please the court. The state alleges that Mr. Turner perpetrated a robbery at Bennett's Market on October 12th. But the evidence, and particularly the chain of custody for the fingerprint and the propriety of Mr. Turner's treatment, reveals a rush to judgment fueled by racial bias. We ask the jury to keep an open mind and to focus solely on the facts. The district attorney, Victoria Cunningham, followed with practice flourish. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a straightforward case of theft. We have surveillance footage, fingerprint analysis by certified examiners, and an eyewitness identification from the store owner, Mr. Simmons. You will hear how Mr. Turner forcibly took $500 and threatened violence. The defense will ask you to ignore these facts that are beyond dispute. She paused, eyes scanning the jury box. At the end of this trial, it will be your duty to deliver justice by convicting Mr. Turner of the crime he committed. Catherine exchanged a knowing glance with Malachi. His whispered reply came instantly. Emphasize the burden of proof. When Catherine rose, she began. The presumption of innocence means the state must prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This standard is deliberately high because we value liberty and fairness. Friends, tonight I ask you to hold the state to that burden. She laid out the defense's roadmap. 1. Challenge the fingerprint's integrity. 2. Scrutinize the eyewitness identification. And 3. Expose the community bias that led to Mr. Turner's arrest. The first state witness, Officer Dalton, took the stand mid-morning. Clad in crisp police regalia, he exuded confidence. He testified that he responded to a robbery in progress call and handcuffed Samuel within 60 seconds of his arrival. Malachi's note fluttered across the table. Ask about reasonable suspicion. When Catherine's turn arrived, she gently probed, Officer Dalton, what led you to believe Mr. Turner was the perpetrator? He answered, Mr. Simmons pointed directly at him. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. And when you approached, did you observe Mr. Turner brandishing a weapon or making threats? Dalton shifted. No, just pointing. Catherine followed. Had Mr. Simmons described any weapon? Had he said the suspect threatened him? Dalton's shoulders sagged. No, ma'am. With that single exchange, Catherine highlighted that the arrest lacked reasonable suspicion of a violent crime, an essential requirement under Terry v. Ohio. Whispers rippled through the courtroom as jurors exchanged glances. Next, the state introduced the fingerprint evidence. A certificate from the Georgia Crime Lab declared a high-probability match between a partial print on the store counter and Samuel's known prints. The analyst, Dr. Kendrick, stood by his conclusion. Malachi leaned close to Catherine. Chain of custody is critical. She stood and asked, Dr. Kendrick, please detail the steps taken to secure and analyze this print. The expert recited a meticulous sequence, collection, transport, analysis, until Catherine produced the lab's dispatch logs. She pointed to a discrepancy. The print kit was logged out by Detective Mercer on October 14th, but the return was recorded 2 days late, after Malachi's courtroom intervention. The analyst stumbled. I'm not certain why, Catherine pressed. So the print could have been tampered with during that interval. The judge watched impassively as a somber murmur enveloped the gallery. Doubt had been seeded. By lunchtime, tension soared. The jurors shuffled notes, some scribbled vigorously. Malachi and Catherine huddled in whispers. Outside the courtroom, Mrs. Patton laced her fingers with Judge Matthews, both exchanging terse updates. Simmons was scheduled next, and Detective Mercer's cross-examination needed to be razor-sharp. After the recess, the defense called Mrs. Carla Duncan, the elderly neighbor who first witnessed Samuel helping the white customer. Under direct examination, she described Samuel kneeling to assist, not fleeing. Then under Catherine's questioning, guided by Malachi's silent cues, she recounted how Simmons had initially thanked Samuel before the police arrived. Yet in his original 911 call, Simmons made no mention of being helped. Instead, he alleged immediate hostility. Catherine held up the 911 transcript. Simmons recorded words, "He's trying to grab my register. I'm scared." Under the bright lights, Simmons' later police statement appeared delegitimized by his own contradictory recounting. Malachi's heart pounded as Simmons himself took the stand. The store owner's posture was defensive, shoulders hunched. Catherine's cross-examination unfolded like a strategic chess game. She began, "Mr. Simmons, you testified that Mr. Turner threatened you. In your police interview, did you mention any threats?" He stammered, "Well, Catherine flashed his own written statement, where no threats were recorded. Simmons squirmed, glancing toward Judge Hawthorne as if pleading for intervention. Catherine pressed on, "So why claim threats now?" Simmons swallowed. "That, I thought there might have been." Catherine paused, allowing the silence to lengthen. "You had every incentive to identify Mr. Turner as the culprit. Your store was in foreclosure, correct?" "Objection." Cunningham rose, but Catherine anticipated it. "Your Honor, witness's financial interest bears on credibility." Judge Hawthorne hesitated, then overruled. Simmons' face paled as he nodded. Catherine had exposed motive and shattered the eyewitness's reliability in one deft move. By mid-afternoon, the prosecution's case lay in tatters. Detective Mercer's enhanced footage failed to clearly reveal Samuel's face. His fingerprint evidence was tainted by chain of custody gaps. Simmons' credibility lay in ruins. Jurors who had seemed unimpressed earlier now whispered among themselves, heads inclined toward the defense table. Malachi watched each subtle shift. The slight frown of Juror 7, the note-taking of Juror 3, the trembling lip of the lone black juror. Yet D.A. Cunningham was unbowed. She called her final witness, Detective Mercer, back to clarify his role in investigating the market security system. Malachi's note was urgent. "Highlight detective bias." When Catherine's cross began, she asked, "Detective, how many property crime investigations have you led in Glenwood Heights?" Mercer gave a curt number. 17. Catherine leaned forward. "Of those, how many resulted in arrests of black residents?" Mercer hesitated. 15, I believe." Catherine glanced at the jury. "The neighborhood is only 40% black. How do you explain that discrepancy?" Mercer's jaw clenched. He opened his mouth to object, but Catherine anticipated. "Witness's past conduct speaks directly to bias. Please answer." The detective's face reddened as he mumbled, "Some areas have higher crime rates." Catherine held up public crime statistics showing no disproportionate crime in black neighborhoods. The courtroom buzzed with stunned energy. At that moment, Judge Hawthorne banged his gavel. "Sustained. Next witness." But the damage was irreversible. The jury's expressions ranged from curiosity to unease, many glancing at the defense table now with empathy. The prosecution rested. Catherine rose for her closing argument as the late afternoon sun slanted through high windows, illuminating particles of dust that danced like motes of truth. She spoke softly at first, then forcefully. "Members of the jury, this trial was never about a clear-cut robbery. It was about assumptions made because of Mr. Turner's age, race, and the color of his skin. You have seen how evidence can be manipulated, how witnesses can lie, how a system meant to protect can instead oppress. The state has failed to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. In fact, they have proven bias, they have proven contradictory testimony, they have proven unreasonable arrest and unreliable forensics. To convict Mr. Turner would be to reward prejudice and deny justice. I ask you to honor our highest standard, hold the state to its burden, and find Mr. Turner not guilty in full." Her words resonated in the hushed courtroom. Malachi felt his chest tighten with anticipation as jurors sat pensively, some closing eyes in contemplation, others leaning forward as if drawn in by Catherine's moral clarity. D.A. Cunningham rose for her rebuttal, but her voice lacked earlier certainty. She repeated procedural jargon, implored for law and order, but her arguments sounded hollow now. The gavel fell, and Judge Hawthorne instructed the jury to retire for deliberation. As the doors closed, a hush fell. Catherine offered Samuel a reassuring nod. Samuel slipped an arm around Malachi's shoulder. "You were brilliant," he whispered, tears glistening. Malachi simply nodded. There was no time for triumph yet. He knew the jury could still surprise them. An hour later, the jury filed back in. Samuel's heart hammered as he rose. Judge Hawthorne's face was inscrutable. The foreperson stood, an accountant with gray-streaked hair. "On the charge of robbery in the first degree," she began, "we, the jury, find the defendant—" She paused, drawing breath. "Not guilty." A collective exhale filled the room. Samuel pressed a hand to his chest, disbelief and relief colliding. Malachi felt his knees buckle for a moment, then steadied himself as tears of elation pricked his eyes. Catherine exhaled, her crisp suit wrinkling as she embraced her client. Outside, reporters clamored. Cameras flashed. Malachi and Samuel ascended the same polished steps where fear and prejudice had once threatened to engulf them. Mrs. Patton and Judge Matthews awaited, applause and tears mingling. Catherine guided them through the sea of microphones. "This victory is not just for the Turner family," Catherine declared, voice unwavering. "It is for every person wrongly accused, every child told they are too small to matter. Today, justice prevailed because of courage, intellect, and community." Malachi clutched his grandfather's hand. In that moment, he felt the power of knowledge, the power of standing firm against injustice. He knew their fight was far from over. The system would seek to repair its reputation through investigations into misconduct. But for now, Glenwood Heights celebrated. As dusk descended, the Turners walked home beneath a tapestry of street lamps. Neighbors clustered at front porches, offering hugs and words of gratitude. Malachi paused at the corner, looking up at the magnolia trees that lined their block, petals drifting like tiny white flags of peace. "Grandpa," he whispered, "we did it." Samuel swept him into a hug. "We did it," he corrected. "You led the way, Malachi. Because of you, the truth had a voice, no matter how small." Malachi looked up at the faceless facade of their modest home, windows glowing with warmth. Inside, those leather-bound tomes waited for the next chapter. A new battle might already be brewing: official reviews, press scrutiny, potential civil suits. But he felt ready. Knowledge, he realized, was not merely a refuge. It was the most potent form of justice, wielded by whoever dared to learn, to question, and to speak. And in the quiet of that evening, as the Turner family stepped across the threshold of home, Malachi understood. This trial was just the beginning. Dawn broke over Atlanta with unseasonable warmth, as if the city itself exhaled in relief. Malachi Turner awoke at Mrs. Patton's house before the first bird stirred, his mind already racing through the day's schedule. Today was not just the conclusion of Samuel Turner's trial, it was humanity's verdict on the corrosive power of prejudice. Over a quiet breakfast of biscuits and sweet tea, Judge Harold Matthews appeared at the kitchen door. His graying hair was impeccably combed, and his eyes held a measured excitement. "I've arranged for you both to meet with a representative of the Innocence Project after court," he whispered to Malachi. "They want to document your case as an example for legal clinics nationwide." Malachi's heart thumped. His grandfather grasped his shoulder. "Your work is bigger than this courtroom," Samuel said softly. "But first, we finish what we started." By mid-morning, the courthouse steps thronged with community members, reporters, and legal observers drawn by news of a potential civil rights lawsuit. Beneath the broad columns, statues of justice loomed, blindfolded, scales balanced, a silent reminder of ideals not yet attained. Malachi adjusted his blazer, glancing to Catherine Sullivan, who offered a confident nod. Today they would unveil the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed the Turners and dozens of other homeowners in Glenwood Heights. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Hawthorne took the bench with an uncharacteristic hesitation. He exchanged a curt nod with DA Victoria Cunningham, both aware that the Turner case had ignited a firestorm of public scrutiny. Cunningham rose to her feet first. "Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss with prejudice all charges against Mr. Turner, based on newly uncovered evidence of misconduct and bias." The courtroom stirred. It was an acknowledgement of wrongdoing that rarely came from the prosecution side. Catherine stood, voice steady. "Your Honor, we also move to file a civil rights complaint, naming those responsible for fabricating evidence, suppressing exculpatory footage, and orchestrating racially biased prosecutions in Glenwood Heights." She cited internal emails from Piedmont Properties Group, court filings showing backdated records, and affidavits from Detective Mercer's 3 internal affairs investigations. Malachi sat forward, every muscle taut. Judge Hawthorne drew in a breath. The weight of the Odyssey pressed upon him. "Very well," he said finally. "The dismissal is granted with prejudice. A status conference is set for the civil rights action." His gavel rapped. A powerful wave of emotion washed through the gallery. Family members wept openly. Neighbors cheered. Reporters snapped photos of Malachi's solemn face and Samuel's tearful embrace of Catherine. But the real drama unfolded quietly in Judge Hawthorne's chambers, where he stayed behind, poring over the Turner files. The evidence was undeniable. His own conduct had fallen short, and his courtroom had been weaponized against justice. That evening, Oakwood Heights erupted in celebration. Front porches glowed with strings of lights. Impromptu block parties filled the air with laughter, music, and the scent of BBQ. Malachi and Samuel arrived at their renovated family home, a sharp contrast to the modest two-bedroom house it once was. Community members had banded together to fund repairs during Samuel's incarceration. Now the front lawn was a sea of welcome home banners. But Malachi's mind was already looking ahead. Inside, Catherine and Judge Matthews waited, along with dozens of neighbors, to hear the next chapter in the Turner saga. Mrs. Patton, holding Malachi's hand, guided him to a makeshift podium. The dusk sky blazed in shades of gold and lavender, the horizon like a promise reborn. Malachi cleared his throat, heart swelling with both pride and responsibility. "Thank you, everyone, for being here," he began, voice resonant. "This isn't just my grandfather's victory. It's ours. It's a testament to what happens when a community refuses to be silenced." Murmurs of agreement rippled outward. Too often, the law is a shield for the powerful. But today, we prove that the powerless can use that same shield to protect themselves. If they know how. He paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. Young children clutching homemade signs, elders leaning on canes, friends who had never spoken in public, but stood shoulder to shoulder now. "I stand before you not just as an 8-year-old who loves books and legends of justice, but as someone who believes that every person, no matter their age or background, can make a difference." Tears glistened in more than one eye. Malachi took a steadying breath. "Samuel and I have filed a civil rights lawsuit, not for vengeance, but for accountability. We want a system where evidence cannot be tampered with, where biased prosecutors cannot roam free, and where future Malachis don't have to fight alone." A roar of applause greeted him. Catherine stepped forward to call out the 4 co-plaintiffs, homeowners whose properties were targeted by the same conspiracy. One by one, each shared brief testimonies of threats, wrongful arrests, and financial ruin. Their voices, tremulous at first, grew stronger. Then Samuel held up his hand. Silence fell again. "Tonight, I am home because my grandson refused to accept fear," Samuel said, voice thick. "He refused to be intimidated by guns, handcuffs, or the weight of this courthouse. And because of him, and all of you, I can sleep in my own bed again." He pulled Malachi into a hug that spoke volumes. As lanterns swayed and the scent of magnolia blossoms drifted on the warm breeze, Judge Matthews concluded, "May this moment be recorded in history, not as an anomaly, but as the spark that ignited lasting reform." Mrs. Patton offered a final blessing. "We thank God for our Turners, our scholars of justice." Asterisk. In the weeks that followed, the Turner civil rights case drew national attention. A federal investigation into judicial misconduct was launched. D.A. Cunningham faced an ethics review. Piedmont Properties executives resigned amid calls for prosecution. The Georgia legislature convened a special committee on prosecutorial accountability and court transparency. Governor Michaels signed the Turner Justice Act, mandating body camera footage preservation, chain of custody audits, and protections for youthful legal advocates. At the same time, Malachi received an unexpected invitation to speak before the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women about children's rights and legal empowerment, a recognition of his work's global significance. He flew to New York, flanked by Catherine and Samuel, and delivered an impassioned address on using education to combat injustice. His opening line, "Age is no barrier to truth," became a viral hashtag #Truth Knows No Age. Back home, the newly established Turner Legal Education Center held its first class in the refurbished family home. Children from all over Glenwood Heights gathered to learn Know Your Rights 101, taught by Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Matthews, and even Malachi himself. now 9 years old, his voice a blend of youthful wonder and seasoned conviction. On the anniversary of Samuel's arrest, a formal ceremony took place on the courthouse steps. Civil rights leaders, state attorneys, and ordinary citizens gathered as plaques were unveiled in honor of the Turner family legacy of justice. Judge Wilson, newly appointed to the Fulton bench, presented Malachi with a personalized leather-bound journal embossed, "To Malachi Turner, may your words continue to change the world." As cameras flashed and speeches concluded, Malachi looked to his grandfather. Samuel beamed, his salt and pepper hair catching the sunlight. Malachi took the podium one last time, voice soft but unwavering. "If there is one lesson I hope you take from our journey, it is this. Knowledge is more than power. It is justice's greatest ally. When you see laws broken or rights abused, do not look away. Learn the law, speak the truth, and wield your voice. Whether you are 8 or 80, your courage can tip the scales." Tears streamed down faces in the crowd. Friends hugged strangers. Reporters scribbled notes with newfound hope. The long arc of justice, once bowed toward despair, now bent steadily toward equity, pushed by the youngest champion of all. That evening, as Malachi and Samuel walked home hand in hand beneath a canopy of stars, Mrs. Patton called out from her porch, "Don't forget, tomorrow you teach the new class." Malachi grinned. "Of course," he replied, "justice never rests." Samuel squeezed his grandson's shoulder. "Nor should we," he said, "especially with a mind like yours leading the way." And so Glenwood Heights found itself forever changed, not by the defeat of a corrupt system alone, but by the unyielding spirit of a boy who refused to be small in the face of injustice. As they disappeared into the soft glow of their front porch light, the night air filled with the promise of more battles fought, more truths spoken, and the unshakable conviction that no voice is too small to echo through the halls of power. If Malachi's story moved you, hit like and subscribe to keep these truths alive. Share your thoughts. Comment 1 if you believe every child can be a force for justice, or 2 if you vow to learn and speak up when you see injustice unfold. Together we can bend the arc ever closer to justice.